So here we have 5.1 talking about money and the money supply in this unit 5, which is just money in the economy. So in 5.1, we're going to talk about a few different things. First of all, types, functions, and characteristics of money. We're also going to talk about two different money supplies, the M1 and the M2. We're going to differentiate between those based on what they include and their characteristics. And then finally, we're going to describe the relationship between supply and demand for money and how that relates to what we call the interest rate. So first of all, we're going to just run through some functions and characteristics of money. I think some of these functions we're kind of aware of, especially this first one, the idea of a medium of exchange. So we use money in our economy because we have to have a way to buy things, right? It's a medium of exchange. It's used as a payment for a good. You walk into a store and you want to buy a bottle of Gatorade. Well, you need to turn over some money in order to receive that bottle of Gatorade, right? We understand that it's used as a medium of exchange. But another thing we often use money for is as a measure of value. Sometimes we also call that a unit of account. Really what this means is that money is like this common measuring stick that we can measure the worth or the value of something, one thing to another. So for example, you walk into a store and you see a shirt that's valued at $25. You see a sweatshirt that's at $30, and those are their price tags. You understand the difference. You understand what that means. And oftentimes when you compare things in your head, you also put monetary values on them in order to compare them. But then finally, we have store of value. Like our money that we have, it keeps its value. It keeps its purchasing power. Just this idea that like it can buy goods and services in the future, right? Our money is durable. It allows us to do that. We can set it aside in a bank, and it does that as well. We see that oftentimes, like, in the barter system, it might not necessarily, money doesn't hold value. Or if we used, apples as our currency, like that wouldn't hold its value. They would rot eventually and no longer have that value. And so all three of these are all functions that we see. Obviously, I think we're a little bit more familiar maybe with that first one there, but we're going to move on to the characteristics of money. So when we think of money within the U.S. economy especially, what are some characteristics of that money that we see? Well, first of all, we see that money is very portable. Like if we think about it, it's like very lightweight, it's convenient. Like think about bills. They're so thin. You put them in your wallet, you put your wallet in your pocket, you don't even think about it. Even more so, we're seeing, the kind of how money is switched to maybe like debit cards, right? Debit cards, you're basically carrying your bank account on a piece of plastic. Easy to carry. Coins are even relatively small and easy to carry. And anymore, we're starting to see more and more banking and money transferring happening on phones, like with things like Venmo. And so again, money is extremely portable. It's also very durable. If you check out some maybe bills that you have or coins that you have, you really might have coins that date all the way back to, who knows, like 1970s, right? That's extremely durable. They can hold up over time. We use that example on the last slide where we talked about apples and like how apples, they wouldn't store their value. Well, it's because apples aren't durable. They don't last a long time, but coins can. They can last for a number of years. And even our bills are pretty respectable. Like if we think about paper currency, oftentimes they last for upwards of a decade or even more sometimes when they're in circulation. And so they have a respectable lifespan. We see that divisibility is another important thing. We're able to divide our money all the way down to represent values of things all the way down to the hundredth of a dollar, right? The cent is a hundredth of a dollar. That's extremely divisible, and money would be a lot harder to handle if our smallest denomination was like a $10 bill, right? And then finally, scarcity. We talk about this idea that, if there's too much of it, it's going to lose its value, right? The more of something there is, the less valuable it becomes. And the same is true for money. We talk about that whenever we see, for example, what happened in Zimbabwe within the last 20 years, whenever they started to experience hyperinflation, right? That was a problem that we saw. There was too much money and it lost its value. So all these are extremely important characteristics, and they're all characteristics that we see, especially within the money that's used in the U.S. system. So going on to the money supply, we're going to define two different money supplies. First of all, I want to talk about the M1 money supply. The M1 money supply is representing money that exists within our economy that is extremely liquid. And what we mean by liquid is it's very movable. A better way of saying it, maybe it's that money that can be used as a medium of exchange on demand. If I'm to walk up to a counter right now and I have to pay for something right now, how am I able to do so? With money, like actual money. Like credit card doesn't count because that's not my money, right? We're putting it on credit. But how can I actually use money? Well, it can be done two ways, right? Coin and currency, or what we call checkable deposits. Checkable deposits is that stuff that's in your bank account upon which you can write a check. So a check is, accessing that money, extremely liquid. You can write a check when you're at a store. I don't know if you have had to do that lately, or maybe ever. But also, we talk about like debit cards, right? You can use debit cards to pull money out of your account on demand. So that's money that's extremely, extremely liquid. We can use it on demand. The M2 money supply takes it a step further. The M2 money supply includes everything in the M1, but it also includes some other things that aren't necessarily as easily accessible or not as liquid. So it's all of that stuff that's used as a medium of exchange. So it does include the M1. M2 does include M1, but it also adds in things for store of value, right? So obviously we include the M1, but then we also include savings accounts, and we use other non-liquid accounts like money market funds and CDs or time deposits. So this is the kind of the current makeup of the M1. If you notice that about 44% of it represents currency that's in circulation. Another 37% represents demand deposits, right? Demand deposits being those debit card accounts that maybe we have out there. Then we have checkable deposits and traveler's checks. Those are all liquid, easily accessible. Here's the M1, kind of how the money supply has grown. It's right now at about $3.7 trillion in the M1 money supply. And this is showing it from the Federal Reserve educational site. But you've seen it's grown over time. We're going to talk about that more in Unit 6 as to why our money supply has grown, especially in recent years. The makeup of the M2, as you can see, includes all of the M1, which is that 24% slice of the pie. But a big chunk of this is savings deposits, right? Savings deposits make up nearly 2/3 of the M2 money supply. We also see another part there for time deposits, small time deposits, anything that's under $100,000, and money market funds as well. Now, the M2 money supply has also been growing over the last 5 years. We see it growing about the same. It looks like same rate in terms of how the graph is set up, but it's actually increased by a couple $1 trillion more than the M1 money supply has. It's at $14.2 trillion currently. So we talk about this money and this money supply, and the money supply, like we say, has recently been growing. Well, what are the implications of that? When we talk about this, we want to talk about the supply and the demand for money, right? So here we have, say, the supply of money. We're going to throw this on a supply and demand graph. This is our supply of money, and you might say, hey, why is that vertical? Why is our money supply straight up and down? I thought it was upward sloping. Well, it's up and down because right now we see that the money supply is not dependent on the price of something, right? In this case, the price of money. The money supply is going to be vertical because the amount of money is going to stay the same. That quantity is going to remain the same no matter what. We see the demand for money, though, is downward sloping. That's our money demand. We see the quantity of money down here along our x-axis, but then we see up here the price of money. Now, when we talk about price of money, we're not necessarily talking about like, oh, what's the price of $1? Because the price of $1 is $1. Okay. What we're talking about is if you want to go and take out a loan, right? What is the price of money? You know, you don't walk into a bank and they just say, yeah, here's $200,000 for a house. Go have fun. What they do is they expect you to pay some of that back on top, and we call that interest. So interest rate is our payment or our price of money. And so let's say the price of money right now is at 5%, right? That's the price. That's how much a borrower must pay back in addition to the original loan. And so we see these laws of demand in action, right? Whenever the price is really high, when interest rates are really high and it's expensive, the cost is high to take out a loan, the demand for loans is going to decrease. But we see same is true the other way. When those interest rates go down, the price is lower, meaning demand for loans increases. Again, we're going to talk about that concept a lot when we get into Unit 6. Because what we saw over the last 10 years or so was monetary expansion. And that was that idea that the money supply was increasing. And we can see that through a shift to the right? The amount of money within our economy increases. We saw that in our M1 and our M2 money supplies. Now, whenever that happens, if you notice, we hit a new equilibrium. Our new equilibrium is down there to the right. We slide down along the demand curve, and we hit this new equilibrium there at 3%. So what's happened is our interest rate has gone down. And as that interest rate goes down, because banks have more money to loan out, right? That means more people are willing and able to take out loans. And that not just goes for people, but also means businesses. They take out that money, they borrow it, invest it. So investment is going up. And if you remember, investment is part of our GDP formula. And so as that investment goes up, what that means is GDP is going to go up as well. And so monetary expansion is a tool that's used by the Federal Reserve. We're going to talk about that next unit in order to increase the GDP. But again, as we said, same is true the other direction. Say our money supply shrinks. As our money supply shrinks, what we see is that there's less money available. And because of that, we see that we have this new equilibrium as we slide there up along our demand curve, and the price of money or interest rates goes up. Banks don't have as much money to loan out, and because there's less of something, right, money, the more valuable it becomes. The price goes up. that means investment is going to go down and our GDP is going to go down as well. And so in order to bring the GDP down or maybe slow the rate of growth of the GDP, what we can see is that we can contract the money supply. Now we're going to talk in Unit 6 how this is done, because it's not like in order to expand the money supply, they just drop money out of a helicopter, or to contract it, they just walk into your bank account and pull it out. There's systematic ways to do it. And we'll go through that as we talk about something known as monetary policy, which is one of the most important roles of the Federal Reserve.